still.
The 5 silver pieces. 5 coins. That's what the cloaked man counted into my stepmother's palm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each piece struck the next with a thin clink the village square had no business hearing on a Tuesday morning, and yet every soul there heard it. The blacksmith's apprentice, the miller's wife, the 2 boys with the cart of rotten cabbage, all of them stopped pretending they weren't watching. I was 16 years old. The dress on my shoulders had been my sister's before it was mine. My hair stuck to my cheek where I'd been crying without knowing it, and my hands were tied at the wrists with the same rope my father used to bind the lame mare he'd shot the winter before. 5 silver pieces. That was Marda's price for me. She didn't look at my face when she took the coins. She looked at the coins. She bit one of them between her front teeth, a habit she'd learned from her father, who'd been a horse trader before the plague years. She nodded once, like she'd just bought a length of cloth that turned out to be cheaper than expected, and then she stepped back behind my father. My father didn't look at me at all. The cloaked man's voice was quiet, the way water is quiet when it runs deep.
She'll do. Untie her hands.
She'll bolt.
She won't bolt. Untie her.
Marda's mouth opened to argue, but something in the way the cloaked man stood, half-turned, half-shadowed, his face mostly hidden inside the hood, stopped her. She gestured at Kestrel. My older sister stepped forward with her head down and her fingers shaking, and worked the knot from my wrists without saying my name. Kestrel didn't say my name once. Not from the moment they pulled me out of the back room at first light, not while Marda was hissing at her to comb my hair so I wouldn't look like a feral thing, not in the square with the coins on her stepmother's palm. She undid the rope. She put her hand on my forearm for 1 second. Then she let go and stepped back.
Walk!
I walked. He had a cart. It wasn't a fine cart. The wheels were patched with iron strips, and the bed of it was lined with old wool, the colour of weak tea. There was no driver, no second man, no guards, just him and a tall grey horse with a star on its forehead, and the cart, and a rolled blanket inside the cart. He didn't help me up, and he didn't push me. He pointed at the bed and waited. I climbed in. He climbed onto the bench. He clicked his tongue at the horse. The cart began to move. Hollowmere has 1 street. It runs from the well at the south end, up past the smithy, past the chapel that the priest abandoned 3 winters ago, past the magistrate's house with the green shutters, and out the north gate into the woods. I had walked that street every day of my life. I had carried bread along it. I had carried washing along it. I had carried my mother's body along it once, when I was 11, on the day we put her in the ground next to the chapel wall. I rode out of it in the back of a stranger's cart, with 5 of my own price coins jingling in my stepmother's apron. Nobody waved. Halric the magistrate stood on his front step with a clay cup in his hand and watched us pass. He gave the cloaked man a small nod, the kind of nod a man gives when a debt has been paid. I understood then that the coins had not all stayed with Marda. Some of them had bought my stepmother my passage out. Some of them had bought Halric his silence. The gate creaked behind the cart. The village ended. The forest began. For a long time I did not cry. The crying had happened already, in the room with the dirt floor where Marda had told me the night before that they could not keep me through another winter. There had been a great deal of crying then. There was none left for the cart. I watched the man's back. He had broad shoulders under the cloak. His hair, what I could see of it, was dark and long and gathered loose at his neck with a leather cord. He didn't speak. He didn't turn around. He drove like a man who'd driven this road 100 times and didn't need to think about it. We passed under the great oak at the bend in the road, where the village boys used to climb in summer. We passed the bramble field where, As a child, I had once cut my hand badly enough that my mother had to stitch it shut with a sewing needle and horsehair. We passed the place where the road forks west toward Graylin and east toward the deeper woods of Blackthorn Vale. He took the east road. I had never been on the east road. The trees got taller, the light got thinner. When the sun finally dropped behind the western ridge, the man stopped the cart at the edge of a clearing. He climbed down. He came around to the back. He held up a hand to me. Not roughly, not gently, just a hand. The way you might offer your hand to anyone.
You should walk a little. Your legs will cramp if you ride all the way.
I took his hand. His palm was warm and rough, and there was a long, pale scar across the back of his knuckles. And when I looked up, I saw, for the first time, the bottom half of his face. A hard jaw, a mouth that didn't seem to know how to smile, a beard cut close. He let go of my hand the second I was on the ground. "What's your name?" I said. He looked at me.
Othrin.
That was all. We walked into the clearing together. I could smell wood smoke. I could smell horses. I could smell something else underneath. Wet fur, maybe. And something darker. Animal. There were 3 tents made of stretched hide pitched in a half circle around a fire pit, and a cook fire going low, and 4 or 5 figures moving in the dimness around the fire. They stopped moving when they saw me. A woman in a leather and wool kirtle straightened up from where she'd been turning a spit. A boy of maybe 12 dropped the kindling he'd been carrying. An older man with one cloudy eye laid down the knife he'd been sharpening on a stone and stood up slowly. Nobody said anything. They all just looked. Then, from the dark beyond the tents, came the wolves. I almost screamed. I didn't, because Othrin's hand caught my elbow at exactly the right moment, and his voice, low at my ear, said one word.
Still.
So I stood, and I watched 4 wolves come into the firelight on soft pads. 2 grey, 1 black, one that was almost cream white with a torn left ear. And I watched them stop at the edge of the camp and sit down on their haunches like dogs at a hearth. Their eyes caught the fire. Their eyes were gold.
They won't touch you.
"What are they?" I whispered.
Family.
He took his hand off my elbow. The woman by the spit came forward. She was older than me by maybe 10 years, with a long brown braid and a face that had seen weather. She looked me over with an honest, unsentimental kind of attention, the way a midwife looks at a girl who's brought in too thin.
"You poor thing. He didn't tell you, did he?"
"Tell me what?" She glanced at Othrin.
Feed her. Then I'll tell her.
The food was hot. It was a stew of roots and some meat I didn't ask about. The bowl was wood, the spoon was wood, and the cup of small beer that came with it was the first warm thing I'd had in 2 days. I ate with my hands shaking. The woman, she said her name was Halla, though she had a longer pack name she didn't give me, sat across from me and pretended not to watch. The wolves lay down between the tents and slept. The boy with the kindling came back and laid a thin wool cloak across my shoulders without asking. When the bowl was empty, Othrin came and sat opposite me at the fire. He pushed back his hood. In the firelight, he was older than I had thought, maybe 28, maybe 30, with a white streak in his hair above his left temple, where some old wound had healed badly. He had grey eyes.
You're wondering what I paid 5 silver pieces for.
Yes.
I didn't buy a wife. I didn't buy a servant. I didn't buy a body for the camp.
Then what? He looked into the fire for a long moment. The white wolf with the torn ear lifted its head, set it down again.
Your grandmother was a woman called Iora Aldrith. She was born in a village 3 days east of Hollowmere. Have you ever heard that name?
My grandmother was Iora, I said slowly. But my father said she ran off. He said she shamed the family.
She didn't run off. She was driven out. And the man she went to, the man she lived with for 40 years before she died, was the alpha of the pack, that's been in Blackthorn Vale since before your village had a name. Your grandmother was a Luna Wren, your father's mother, and the mark she carried is in your blood. And I have come 3 years looking for the girl who carries it next.
He looked up. His grey eyes were the same colour as the smoke.
You.
The fire cracked. Somewhere in the dark beyond the tents, a wolf I hadn't seen yet began to howl, and the 4 around the fire lifted their heads and answered, and the sound of it went up into the trees and broke against the moon. I started to cry then. I didn't know which thing I was crying for. The mark beneath the skin. The morning came grey and slow. I had slept under a stretched hide in a tent I shared with Halla, and I woke twice in the night to the sound of paws moving outside the canvas. Each time, my heart had crawled into my throat and stayed there, until my body, exhausted past fear, dragged me back into sleep. When I sat up at dawn, the wolves were nowhere I could see, and Hatla was already gone, and there was a clean linen shift folded at the foot of my pallet. The linen had been washed in something that smelled of pine and tallow. The hem had been mended where someone had cut their finger and bled on it years ago, and the blood had faded to a brown stain shaped like a leaf. The dress they had taken off me, Marda's old one, the one with the rope marks on the wrist, was gone. I put the linen on. When I stepped out of the tent, the camp was busy. The boy from the night before was carrying water from somewhere south. Hallo was tending a pot. 2 men I hadn't seen yet were stripping the bark from a felled birch. The cloudy-eyed man was filing the edge of a long curved knife. None of them stared at me, but I could feel them noticing me, the way you notice a hare cross a clearing. Wren was talking to a woman I hadn't yet met. She was old. She sat on a low stool by the dead fire pit, wrapped in 3 layers of grey wool, with a wooden cup in both hands and her head bowed, as if to listen better. Her hair was white and uncombed. Her face had so many lines I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Wren was crouching in front of her, so their eyes met when she looked up. He saw me come out of the tent. He stood.
Wren, this is Yethra. She'd like to read you.
Read me?
Your mark.
The old woman lifted her head. Her eyes were not cloudy like the man with the knives. They were the dark grey of a sky before hard rain, and when they landed on me, I forgot for a second to breathe.
Come, child, and sit.
I sat. She set the cup down. She reached out with both hands. Her fingers were thin as the bones of a small bird, and her nails were filed flat. She laid her palms against my collarbones, one on either side, and her hands were cold, and I felt the cold of them go down through my skin like she was holding ice against me.
Lower the linen.
I lowered the shift to my shoulders. She tilted her head. She bent close. She looked at the place where the hollow lay between my throat and my left collarbone, and her breath made a soft sound, and her thumb traced a slow half-circle there.
Do you see it?
See what?
Halla.
Halla came at once with a polished disc of tin, the kind of mirror a village girl might dream of and never own. She held it up at the right angle. I looked. There, on the skin above my collarbone, was a mark. I had never seen it. It was small, the size of a fingernail, and it was the pale grey of an old scar. And it was shaped exactly like a crescent moon, with 3 small dots clustered at its open mouth. It hadn't been there yesterday. It hadn't been there in any mirror or wash basin of my life.
It came out in the night. It always does. When the girl crosses into the veil, the mark wakes. It has been sleeping under your skin since the day you were born.
I touched it. It was warm. My grandmother had this?
Your grandmother had this, and her mother before her, and that woman's aunt. The Aldrith women carry the moon child. Most of them die without it ever showing. But every fourth or fifth generation, the moon decides one of them is to be the next.
The next what? She smiled at me for the first time. Her teeth were yellow and small and even.
Luna, mate to the Alpha of the Vale, mother of the next.
I looked at Othrin. He was already looking at me. He hadn't moved. I am not going to marry you, I said, before I could stop myself. Othrin did something I didn't expect. He laughed. It was a short laugh, and it was tired, and it sounded as though it surprised him too. The corner of his hard mouth turned up exactly once, and then he was serious again.
That's not how the bond works, and no one is asking you to marry anyone. We don't take Lunas. We find them. If you decide in time that the Vale is your place, then the bond will form between us on its own. If you decide otherwise, you go where you want, and the pack pays you the moon price for the gift of your blood and your training, and we never see you again. Either way, no one here will touch you. That is the law.
And until I decide?
Until you decide, you eat with us. You sleep where Hala sleeps. You train with Vale in the glade. You learn what your grandmother never had a chance to teach you. And the night the moon is full, you walk into the trees with us, and you find out what your body has been waiting your whole life to do.
I sat with my hand on my collarbone. The mark was still warm under my fingers. The glade was a half-mile north of the camp, in a hollow where a stream ran clear and shallow over a bed of pale stones. Vale was already there when Hadler walked me down to it. He was tall and lean, with hair the colour of wet straw and a face that had decided, before I'd arrived, that it didn't like me.
This is her.
This is her.
She's small.
They're often small.
Vale folded his arms. He looked at me the way the magistrate Halric used to look at the village girls who came to his door asking for grain in lean months. Not with cruelty, with assessment, with the certainty that whatever he was looking at was, finally, not enough.
Take off your shoes. Stand in the stream.
I took off my shoes. The water bit my ankles. The stones were smooth under my feet.
Close your eyes.
I closed them.
Now breathe in, slow, and listen for the second heartbeat.
The second heartbeat.
You have one. Every Aldrich woman has one. It runs underneath the one you were born with. Find it.
I stood in the stream and I listened. I listened for a long time. I heard the water. I heard a bird I didn't recognize, and another I did. I heard the distant clatter of a horse's bit being adjusted back at the camp. I heard my own breath. I heard the slow thump of my heart in my ears. And then, faintly, I heard another one. It was lower. It was slower. It was deeper than the first, and it didn't match the first. And the moment I noticed it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and a feeling I'd never had before went down my spine like a swallow of strong drink. I opened my eyes. Vale was watching me.
You felt it.
Yes?
Tomorrow we begin properly. Tonight you sleep early, and don't eat meat.
Why not?
Because tomorrow your body is going to try things, and meat in your stomach will make it worse.
He walked off. Hatle came down to the stream and crouched and put her hand on my shoulder.
He'll like you eventually. He hated me too the first month.
You're...
Pack-born. Not Luna. But the bond was open to me, and I took it. The man with the cloudy eye is mine.
Oh.
It's not a sad thing, Wren. The wolves choose you back. That's the difference.
Days passed. I lost count of how many. I will not pretend it was easy. The first time I tried to call the wolf in me at Vale's word, I vomited into the stream. The second time, I broke a small bone in my own hand without understanding how. The third time, on the 8th night, I felt the lower heartbeat rise up in my chest and meet the upper one and braid with it. And I went down on my knees in the grass, and when I lifted my head, my teeth had grown forward in my mouth, and my nails had split out of my fingers, and my pupils were so wide that Halle, when she ran to me, said she could see the firelight reflected in them like a cat's. I didn't shift fully that night. I shifted half. "Half is enough," Youthfa said afterward, with her papery hand on my hair. "Half is more than most Lunas manage in a year." The pack started to look at me differently after that. Vale did not laugh. Vale did not soften exactly. But on the morning after the half shift, he placed a hunting knife into my palm without speaking, and he closed my fingers around it, and he nodded once. It was the first kindness he had ever given me. The bond with Othrin happened the way Yethra had said it would. Slow. On its own. Without anyone reaching for it. I would catch his grey eyes across the fire and forget what I was about to say. He would walk past my tent at dusk, and his hand would brush, by accident, the canvas an inch from my shoulder, and I would lie awake afterward feeling the brush. He brought me water from the cold spring on the 3rd week, in a clay cup, and he set it down by my hand and said nothing. And that was the gift. On the 12th night they came for us. I did not know the rival pack by name. The pack from the eastern ridges, Yethra called them later, the broken ones, the ones who had lost their alpha to fever and now followed a half-mad creature who claimed the title and would not give it back. They came down through the trees in the 2nd hour after midnight, 6 wolves and 3 men in the half-shift, and they came for the cubs. I will not write all of what happened. I will write one thing. When the broken pack wolf went for the smallest pup, a little grey thing not 3 months old, who slept always next to Halle, I was already moving before I knew I had moved. I went into the half-shift in the middle of the run. My body did what my body had been preparing 12 days to do. I caught the rival wolf at the shoulder. I rolled. I pinned. I did not kill, because Othrin had taught me, the first day at the glade, that a Luna does not kill what can be turned away. I held the rival wolf's throat between my teeth, until the fight had gone out of him and the broken pack men were calling their own back. When it was over, I was bleeding from 3 places and shaking so hard I could not stand. Othrin picked me up. He carried me back to camp. He did not let me go for a long time after. That night, sitting on the bench by his fire, with my forehead against the side of his neck and the moon a thin white blade above us, I asked him the only question I had not asked yet. "My family," I said. "Did they know? About my grandmother? About me?" He was quiet.
Some of them knew enough. Your father knew his mother had been a Luna. He chose to forget.
"And Marda?"
Marda is the woman your father married to forget.
"And the silver?"
The silver was Halric the magistrate's idea. He had a debt to a man in Graylin. The man in Graylin had a daughter who'd run off with a pack-man 6 summers ago. He told Halric a story about us. Halric told Marda. Marda took 5 coins to give you to us, and 4 of those coins went back to Halric the same afternoon.
4.
Yes.
Out of 5.
Yes.
I sat with that. Hollowmere, the square, the bramble fields, my mother's grave by the chapel wall, my sister Kestrel, who had not said my name. A blight on the crops, Halle had said yesterday, when a rider had come up from the south with news. A bad blight. The west fields had gone to black rot. The chapel had taken a stranger in for shelter, and the stranger had given them a fever, and 3 children had died. And the priest had been gone 3 winters, and there was no one to bury them. I lifted my head off Othrin's neck. "I want to go back," I said. He did not ask why.
When?
"Soon." He nodded. The moon went behind a cloud. The mark on my collarbone, in the dark, was warm enough that I could feel it under the linen of my shift, like a coin held too long in the hand. The Luna's return. We rode at dawn on the first day of the next full moon. Wren rode the tall grey horse with the star in its forehead, the same horse that had pulled the cart out of Hollowmere with me in the back. Halla rode a black mare. Vale rode his own horse, a bay with a white sock. The cloudy-eyed man, whose name I had at last learned was Aldris, rode behind us with 2 packmen I had only nodded to in passing. Yethra did not ride. Yethra had stayed.
Luna's come home alone. Don't let them stand for you. Let them stand near you.
I had not understood the difference until the moment we came in sight of Hollowmere's south gate. The gate was open. It was open because no one was watching it. The miller's wife should have been at the well by mid-morning. She was not. The blacksmith's apprentice should have been working the bellows in the smithy that fronted the road. He was not. There was a small girl I half knew, perhaps 4 years old, sitting alone in the dust outside her family's doorway with both her hands inside her mouth and her face streaked with the rust of a long-dried bleed from her nose. She looked up when our horses came past. She did not run. She did not call for her mother. She watched us with eyes that had been watching too many strangers for too many days. And we rode by her, and Halla turned in her saddle and gave a long, slow look back at the child that I will remember for a long time. We came up the one street. We came past the well. We came past the smithy. We came past the chapel whose priest had been gone 3 winters. We came past the magistrate's house with the green shutters, and we stopped, and we sat, and Wren let his grey horse drop its head to the ground. People came out then, not many. The blight and the fever had taken more than I had been told, but faces I had grown up beside came to the open doors and the small windows, and they stood in the doorways with their arms around themselves, and they looked, and they did not know me. I had been gone less than a season. I was wearing the linen shift Halla had given me, with a leather vest over it, and a cloak of grey wool fur across my shoulders, and a hunting knife at my hip that Vale had set in my hand the morning after the half-shift. My hair was longer than they remembered. My face was thinner. The mark on my collarbone was visible above the line of the shift, and the morning light caught it as a small white crescent. And the woman at the closest doorway, the miller's wife, who had stood at her own door the day I was sold and not said a single word for or against, saw the mark before she saw me. Her mouth opened. She knew. Old village stories run deeper than people pretend. She knew, before any of the others, exactly what had come back into Hollowmere on a tall grey horse. Marda came out of our house last. The house was at the north end of the street. It was small, and the door was warped, and the smoke from the hearth had stained the lintel black, and a single hen pecked at the dirt under the window. Marda came out drying her hands on her apron. Behind her, in the doorway, I saw Kestrel. Behind Kestrel, half in shadow, was my father. Marda saw the wolves first. 2 of them had followed us from the camp, low through the trees, and they came now into the square behind our horses. Halla's mate, the cloudy-eyed Aldris in his half-form, and the white wolf with the torn left ear that I had seen the very first night by the fire. They did not snarl. They simply stood at the edge of the square with their gold eyes on Marda, and Marda stopped drying her hands. Then she saw me. She did not scream. Marda was never a screamer. She set her jaw, and she stood her ground, and she stared up at me on the back of Halla's borrowed horse, and her mouth went thin, and she said, in the same voice she had used the night before she sold me,
"You shouldn't have come back."
I got down from the horse. I crossed the square. I crossed it the way the cloaked man had crossed it the morning he had paid for me. Slowly, without hurry, while every soul in the square watched. When I was 3 steps from her, I stopped. Where are the coins, Marda?
What?
The 5 silver coins. Where are they?
I They're spent. They were spent before the first frost.
On what? She did not want to answer. She was not afraid of me, not yet. She was afraid of saying the truth in front of the village, because the village would remember it. She glanced at Halric, the magistrate, who had come out of his green-shuttered house and stopped halfway across his own yard.
Halric took 4.
And the 5th?
Bread.
For who?
Me, your father, your sister.
Not for the child outside the cooper's house with the dried blood on her face. Not for the 3 children the fever took because there was no priest to keep the chapel warm enough through the spring. Not for the miller's wife, who I see is thinner than I am. Marda said nothing. I turned my head. Halric, I said. He stopped in his yard. He had a clay cup in his hand. The cup was the same cup he had been holding the morning of the sale. I think he had not been able to put it down since. You bought my passage out of this village, I said. Did you know what you were selling me to? He looked at me. He looked at the wolves. He looked at the mark above my collarbone. He looked at Othrin on the grey horse with the cloak that had once seemed so dark and now, in daylight, was the color of wet earth. He did not answer. He didn't have to. I let the silence sit. Then Halric did a small thing. He set the clay cup down on the wall of his own yard. He set it down carefully, the way a man sets down a thing he is not sure he will get to pick up again. He did not run. I have thought about that since. About the dignity, if you can call it dignity, of a guilty man who does not run. I am not here for him, I said to Marda. I am not here for you. I am here for the village.
The village
is dying. She did not deny it. The Vale will help you, I said. There is grain at Blackthorn that will not last the pack the winter, but it will last Hollowmere until the next harvest if we are careful with it. There are 2 pack healers who can come down and look at the fever cases. There is a man at the camp who knows how to cut the black rot out of a field and burn it clean so the next planting will take. All of this will come, and it will come because I am asking it to come.
Why?
It was Kestrel who asked. She had stepped out from the doorway. She had been crying. I could see it on her face. But she was not crying now. She was looking at me the way she had not looked at me the morning of the sale. She was looking at my face.
Why?
Because the woman I would have been, if you had not let her go, would have wanted it. Kestrel started to speak. She stopped. She put one hand over her mouth and the other on the doorframe of our father's house, and she lowered her head, and she stayed that way. Halric, in his yard, lowered himself slowly onto one knee. He did not look up. I let him stay there. I turned back to Marda. There is one thing I have come to take with me when I go.
Take it.
My grandmother's name. She did not understand. Eora Aldreth, I said. You are not to use that name again as a curse in this house. You are not to tell my sister, or any child she has, that her grandmother ran off in shame. You are to tell them, when they are old enough, that Eora Aldreth was a Luna of Blackthorn Vale, and that her granddaughter was sold to her pack for 5 silver coins, and that the pack came back to feed this village in a hard year. That is what you will tell them. That is the only price I am taking. Marda looked at the ground. She nodded. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But I had decided, somewhere on the road between Ythra's reading tent and the south gate of Hollowmere, that I was not going to be the thing they had sold me to be. I was not going to be the answer they had braced themselves for. I was going to be something they could not have imagined, and I was going to leave them with that, and with the grain, and with the healers, and with the truth about the woman in the ground 3 days east of here who had been my father's mother. My father stepped out of the doorway then. He came forward. He was a small man. He had always been a small man, and grief had made him smaller. And he stopped a long arm's length from me, and he did not lift his eyes from the dirt.
Wren.
I know, I said. I know, Father. He lifted his head. His eyes were the colour of mine. For a long second, neither of us spoke. He had not held me since I was 11 years old, since the day my mother went into the ground, and he did not move to hold me now. But he looked at me. He looked at me the way a man looks at his daughter when his daughter has come back from a place he was sure she would not survive.
Your mother's mother. She told me once before the wedding that if a daughter ever came who carried the mark, we were to let her go to them. I forgot.
You forgot for a long time.
I forgot for too long.
I stepped past him into the doorway. The house smelled exactly the way I remembered. I took the iron pot off its hook above the cold hearth. I tipped it. Underneath, where Marda kept what little coin our family ever had, was the small leather pouch. I lifted it. I opened it. There was 1 silver coin left. I closed my hand around it. I came back out into the square. I gave the coin to the miller's wife. She wept. She did not say a word. She put it inside her bodice next to her skin. We rode out of Hollowmere by the south gate at dusk. The grain came the next morning on 3 pack carts, with Vale driving the lead. The 2 healers came the morning after that. By the time the next full moon rose over Blackthorn Vale, the black rot in the west fields had been burned out, and the fever had broken in 3 of the 4 sick houses, and the priest from a town 2 valleys west had agreed to come up the road and reopen the chapel. Kestrel wrote me a letter. It came up the road by a peddler's hand. It was not long. It said that she had been the one who put the rope on my wrists that morning, and that she had been the one who combed my hair, and that she had not been able to look me in the face when she did either of those things, and that she had thought, every day since, of whether she would have lifted the rope back off my wrists if she had been braver. She wrote that she did not expect me to write back. She wrote that she did not need me to. I wrote back. I told her to come see me at the next full moon. She came. She did not come alone. She came with the small girl from the Cooper's house, the one with the dried blood on her face, whose mother had died in the worst week of the fever, and who had no one. Kestrel had taken her in. Kestrel asked, in our father's words but in her own voice, whether the Vale would consider taking the child for the season, until Kestrel knew what to do. Halla took the child. The child is still at the Vale. She runs with the cubs. She has not, that we can tell yet, a mark of her own, but Yethra says the moon does not always show its hand in the first generation, and we are watching, and we are patient. On the night of my first true full shift, the night my body did, at last, all the way, what it had been preparing to do since the morning the mark woke under my skin, Othrin stood at the edge of the trees and waited for me to come back. I came back at dawn, on 2 feet, with my hair full of leaves and the print of the night still in my legs, and he was where I had left him, and he put his cloak around my shoulders and his hand against the side of my face.
Wren of the Vale.
Othrin of the Vale, I said. He smiled. He had learned by then how to smile. We went home together into the camp, where the fire was low and the pack was waking, and Halla was already setting the morning's bread, and the white wolf with the torn left ear came out of his shelter and laid his great head against my knee. Somewhere south of us, in Hollowmere, my father was walking down to my mother's grave with a handful of late winter flowers, the way he had not walked in 15 years. Somewhere west of us, in Halrick's empty house with the green shutters, a clay cup still sat on the wall of the yard where he had set it down. The silver coins were buried, all 5 of them, under the great oak at the bend in the road. Vale had put them there, on the way home from the village, at my asking. He had said nothing about it. He had simply dug a hole the depth of his hand and laid the coins in and pressed the earth back over them with his palm. I do not know if anything will grow there, but I like to think the grass that comes up will be a little thicker and a little greener, and that the moon, when she rises over the bend, will know where her own has been buried. 5 silver coins. That's what her own blood thought she was worth. If you walked every mile of that road with Wren, from the mud of Hollowmere's square to the moonlight on Blackthorn Ridge, leave one word in the comments below. Silver, if you'd have spared Marda. Moon, if you'd have shifted in the square in front of her. And if any moment in this story cracked something open in you, tell me which one. I read every line, and the wolves at this channel, in their way, listen too.